Department of Land Economy at the University of Cambridge. His research interests include the interaction between technology innovation and adoption and construction management. I look forward to his presentation on the ways of achieving greater use of offsite manufacturing for new housing. Please join me in welcoming Kwadwo. And for colleagues who have registered for the post-event meetings, Vian will admit you to breakout room to meet with Kwadwo. Please stick around for a bit longer after the seminar. Finally, our next speaker is going to be Fan Yi from the US. She will be talking about the behavior of mainland home buyers in the Hong Kong housing market. Please feel free to register for each talk using the link provided in Vian's email. I will also include the link in the chat in case you're interested. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and Kwadwo, now the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to you. And I'm pleased to be here. HKU is my alma mater. I'm not sure if Michael mentioned that, and I'm actually from the Department of Real Estate and Construction. I completed my PhD with Roine, who is one of the faculty staff in the construction project management side of the department. So it's good to be back, and I'll begin by sharing my screen for my presentation. Okay, thank you. I hope everyone can see my screen. You can just give me a thumbs up if you can. Yeah, so thank you very much for the opportunity. I work as a research associate at the Department of Land Economy in the Center for Housing and Planning Research at the University of Cambridge. And the work I'm going to talk you through is a publication with colleagues that I work with on a government-sponsored, on a UK government-sponsored research project, which seeks to analyze the social context to the uptake of digital innovations and offsite construction in the UK construction industry. And this is on the back of ongoing efforts by the UK government to transform the UK construction industry. And part of this, one of the key underpinning innovations for the transformation agenda is the greater use of offsite manufacturing and digital technologies, particularly building information modeling. I know that in Hong Kong, it's referred to as modular integrated construction. So anytime I mention offsite manufacturing, just bear that in mind in your understanding of what I would say. So I'm pleased to talk about how countries achieve greater use of offsite manufacturing to build new housing, where we sought to identify typologies through institutional theory. So this is already published in the Sustainable Cities and Society Journal with my colleagues and my our two PIs. It is free to download using the link in the slide. So for this presentation, I'll give a bit of context regarding the research and also set the background as to what led us to ask the question of how countries achieve greater use of offsite manufacturing. And in doing so, following that, I'll provide a snapshot of what the literature about factors driving a shift from traditional on-site construction to greater use of offsite manufacturing, what the literature says, and then talk you through how we deployed institutional theory and the research design and methods, as well as the findings, contribution, and implications. So in terms of setting the context, the problem of housing shortage remains. Global supply of housing is not up to the demand. And I'm sure I believe those in the housing research would understand this more broadly. And this is regardless of context, whether it's an advanced country or a developing country. And more and more, the use of offsite manufacturing, which essentially is a method of delivering building projects involving taking away as many as possible activities that would have been carried out on site into a factory setting in order to produce more efficiently with less waste and have a tight built envelope in order to achieve the desired quality. The benefits of using offsite manufacturing is widely discussed in the literature, including being able to have a clear budget awareness right from the beginning of a project through to the attainment of sustainability goals for various purposes. And as a result of this, because of the benefits offsite manufacturing has over traditional forms of building, it has been deemed to be very suitable for building more and better quality housing faster and at a cheaper rate to help address the problem of housing shortages. And take a look at both industry and academic literature reveals that countries including Germany, Sweden, Singapore, China, and Canada and the USA are advanced or are making strides in terms of having achieved a greater shift from more traditional ways of building, that is on-site construction approaches, to the greater use of offsite manufacturing. And we can see this in in some of the figures reported in industry papers, which cite the fact that in Sweden, the use of offsite manufacturing for the delivery of housing specifically is on the rise and is likely to peak at about 85% as opposed to the rest of the housing stock delivered. And in Japan, for the past 2 decades, the proportion of offsite manufacturing built housing has consistently kept between 12 to 16%. And so these two countries, just by example, are highlight the fact that the use of offsite for the delivery of housing is on the rise. And so, but then in the literature, so following this context, the question became evident that what are the factors that are driving the greater use of offsite manufacturing over traditional construction in these various countries? And from the literature, it became apparent that there are economic factors involved. Regulations tend to also push or drive. Having clear regulations that are related to offsite manufacturing tend to drive uptake, as it helps organize the industry around these clear sets of regulations to ensure high production standards and quality, and a common language in terms of quality reference in the delivery of offsite built housing. Similarly, when lenders' confidence is improved, it facilitates financing of such projects. One of the key challenges that the UK is currently facing is getting over the hump of obtaining finance to facilitate the delivery of housing projects using an innovation like offsite manufacturing. Environmental opportunities and constraints also, in some shape and form, drive the greater use of offsite manufacturing, where in countries which suffer harsh weather conditions, there is more plausibility for the use of offsite manufacturing in order to work as much as possible within a controlled factory environment whilst delivering a high number of output for housing in particular. And the structure of the house building sector has also been discussed, with particular emphasis on how the supplier network interacts for the delivery of offsite manufacturing in various countries. And there's a particular paper about Australia that discusses this. But then if you take a step back and look at all the various factors discussed in the literature, it's apparent that there are similarities in terms of how these factors are described and the impacts they have on the greater use of offsite manufacturing. But then these descriptions remain largely discrete, so they are separate, and there's not an overarching understanding of how these factors play out. And as a result, we realize that in particular, theoretical insights regarding an explanation for how these factors play out, regardless of context, is missing. And a corollary of that is that an opportunity for international learning is lost. And by international learning, I mean the ability to take key lessons from what's happening in other countries to inform what a country like the UK is embarking on. And so the goal of the study was to conduct a cross-country analysis of the impacts of the factors driving greater offsite manufacturing use and how context-specific resources are deployed in response to these factors that are pushing greater use. In terms of a snapshot, I think I've touched on this earlier, but then the literature reveals that government initiatives and interventions have been identified as key drivers. In a recent publication, I think by Wei Pan and some of his colleagues, they discussed how in Hong Kong, government initiatives regarding the CITF funding, as well as having clear policies about the use of MIC, is serving as a driver for the use of MIC, modular integrated construction, in Hong Kong. Similarly, the case exists in Singapore, where we identify that the government has clear-cut funding initiatives to provide training, as well as subsidies for firms that seek to deploy offsite manufacturing approaches to the delivery of housing. And also having specific innovation strategies we identify as one of the factors that tend to drive innovation in relation to offsite manufacturing, where again, I'll use Singapore as an example, where they've got a clear industry transformation framework, which is centered on sustainability, innovation, and skills and training of people. So, but then within this national transformation strategy, there is emphasis on the use of more manufacturing-led approaches for the delivery of housing. Again, I've discussed the regulations for offsite built housing, and in terms of environmental factors and climate, depending on the focus of a particular government in relation to global sustainability and climate action goals, there will be different focus in terms of how strong or how weak emphasis on the achievement of sustainability goals are. So in a country like Sweden, as far as our literature shows us, they have consistently been using timber, which is deemed a more sustainable material as opposed to concrete. They have consistently been using timber for the delivery of their offsite built homes in the country. In terms of resource-related factors that drive greater use of offsite manufacturing, finance, the availability of finance for the support of such an innovation is identified as one of the important resource-related factors available to both house builders and industry lenders to support the use of offsite manufacturing. And in terms of technology, the extent to which the varied degrees of manufacturing-led approaches that could be deployed in a country rests in part on the nature of technology available, that is the manufacturing technology. And from my constructivist background, I'm talking about technology in terms of the design and process, and product technologies that can support the delivery of offsite manufacturing. And in the UK, again, I'll use an example of the fact that there is a drive towards design for manufacturing and assembly, which has now been linked to the RIBA plan of works for to guide design processes for architects. And so the availability of these different kinds of technologies, both the people related ones as well as the artifact related ones that are fixed in factories for the manufacturing of either assemblies, components, or sub-assemblies of walls, floors, and other forms of building components is very important. The availability of skilled workforce is also identified as a very important factor, as a very important resource, because without a skilled resource that have an understanding of how the delivery of projects using offsite manufacturing works, it is close to impossible to actualize the deployment of offsite manufacturing effectively. And not the natural materials within a country also forms part of the resources that can be capitalized upon in the delivery of offsite manufacturing. So in a country where timber is in abundance, it would make sense for CLT, that's cross-laminated timber, for instance, to be used in the production of panelized walls and floors as part of building components for in using offsite manufacturing for house building. So taking a step back from the discrete factors that we had identified from the literature, a question that was posed was to identify what kind of lens could help us agglomerate these different factors in order to make sense of the cross-context developments that we have identified in literature, and also to use this theoretical lens to guide the interrogation of the literature that we went on to analyze. And we concluded that neo-institutional theory is well suited to explain how external and institutional factors influence actions within a given context. And per this theoretical lens, institutional environments can create and exert pressures on the actors operating within that environment to respond accordingly. And in terms of deploying this institutional, theoretical lens, we focused particularly on the three key. We focused on the pressures as well as resources side of the theoretical lens, and in doing so, we focused on what coercive pressures are, what normative pressures are, and what mimetic pressures are. Coercive pressures in this context focus on those kinds of pressures that emanate from actors within an institutional environment that require actors playing in that industry or in that institutional context to respond based on a demand that is placed on them. And these coercive pressures could emanate from government requirements through procurement as well as mandates. Normative pressures, normative pressures through this theoretical lens relate with the norms that are developed based on industry regulations, as well as the practices that are established within the institutional environment, and is agreed upon by the various actors who deploy various responses in response to that kind of pressure. Mimetic pressures emanate from organizations trying to, well, as the name goes, to mimic what their what their counterparts are doing in a given industry context or institutional environment. So successful organizations would then serve as examples, or successful projects will serve as a template for others who identify these projects or organizations as legitimate and follow suit. They would identify what they have done and seek to emulate what has been implemented in order to achieve similar outcomes. And in terms of the resources, we categorize them under workforce, technological, financial, and natural resources based on the literature that we have examined. And so we try to deploy the new institutional theoretical lens to guide our interpretation or our understanding of how different countries achieve offsite manufacturing by looking at both the pressures, by identifying the pressures as well as the resources, the pressures imposed, the nature of the pressures, and the resources deployed in response to these pressures in order to identify the typologies that have the typologies in these different countries. So following our research, the theoretical, our research goal and also the theoretical lens, we analyzed, we qualitatively reviewed 95 secondary data sources from Japan, Singapore, Sweden, Canada, USA, China, and Germany. Of course, these had to be documents that were published in English, and we had to corroborate we drew on multiple sources for the data, including journal articles, books, online repositories, national databases, and industry reports. And you can see the breakdown of the 95 secondary data sources. We focused on these countries, again, based on the relatively high achievements they have made in terms of outputs of built housing that use offsite manufacturing. Through a qualitative content analysis guided by the theoretical concepts of trying to identify the various kinds of pressures, we manually reviewed all these data sources and tried to develop codes based on the pressures as well as the resources. So for each data source, for each country, we went through all the documents, identifying who was taking what action, what the action was leading to, and how the action has been identified in the various countries, in each of the various countries. And the questions that guided the analysis was, who is taking an action? What is the action about? What resources are being utilized as part of the action? And how is the action facilitating the adoption and use of offsite manufacturing for built housing? And these helped us analyze the various sources of data. So for instance, if we took a country like Germany, we would ask, who is taking the action? Is it an action that is coming from the government or industry players? If they are taking the action, what is the action in reference to? What is the action? The deployment of a mandate. What is this action related to? The mandatory use of offsite manufacturing for a percentage of built housing, and what resources are they drawing on to implement this action? They are drawing on financial resources, or they are drawing on legislation to implement this kind of action to achieve the result of driving greater use of offsite manufacturing. So in terms of our findings, so following our analysis, we developed the typologies of how the various countries are driving greater use of offsite manufacturing. The figure you see here summarizes the key findings from the study. On the left-hand side, you see the institutional pressures and the resources identified. So for coercive pressures, we identified that the source of these pressures are government mandates and policy, and there were coercive pressures coming from professional bodies as well, and credential or award-bearing associations. Normative pressures were also coming from the professional influence of large organizations, training institutions, and educational institutions. And successful house building firms were the templates that others followed in order to follow suit, and also in order to deploy offsite manufacturing for the delivery of their own housing. The resources identified were spread across these 4 categories, and they represented differently across the different typologies. So on the right-hand side, we see the typologies that we identified. And each typology has a different mix of pressures, of the pressures that are dominant, and the resources that are mostly capitalized upon. In terms of the key, if you read this figure, in looking at the key, the question that would come up in your mind is, how would we differentiate a country that is high, medium, or low across these different sources? If we take government mandates and policy, for instance, if we take a country like Singapore, we went through all the documents that were related to Singapore in order to trace the pattern of reporting in terms of how the government mandates and policy have been referenced as the basis for decisions that were taken. So whether if it's in an industry report talking about how different organizations have employed various forms of offsite manufacturing for the delivery of housing, the key question is, what is the reference point? Is it as a result? Are they taking these actions as a result of government actions? If they are, then that is marked down, or that is coded as a form of government mandate, as a source of a pressure. And the frequency based on which this reference is made across different documents would inform at the end of the day whether it was high in comparison to the other countries, whether it was high or it was medium or it was low. Where the high will be the highest number of referrals, and the low will be the least number of referrals. And then anything that fell in between would be categorized as medium. So this is more a heuristic definition given as opposed to a metrics-based definition. When it comes to resources, for instance, in terms of, that is for the pressures, in terms of the resources, the amounts of money that either governments or funding agencies were committing towards the use or towards driving greater use of offsite manufacturing were noted. And this informed our understanding of whether it was high, medium, or low. If we look at, so for typology 1, we have Singapore and China. For typology 2, we have Japan and Germany. Typology 3, we've got the USA representing, and Canada and Sweden represented under typology 4. As you would see, each typology is defined by various degrees of pressures as well as the resources deployed. For typology 1, we identify that there is a high level of coercive and mimetic pressures. And to a large extent, the utilization of financial resources. We identified that there were coercive pressures emanating from the sources identified that were having a positive impact on the use of financial resources to secure the right technology and equipment. And government funding was a critical factor in driving the adoption of advanced technologies for offsite manufacturing that were backed by mandates. And so if we refer back to this figure, we would see that government policies and mandates, as well as government policies and mandates, were the key driving sources of coercive pressures, with training on organizations driving high levels of normative pressures and mimetic pressures coming from successful house building firms. But then capital was the most highly used form of resource in response to these forms of pressures. But then although these two countries share similarities in terms of typology, how the industry, that's the house building industry, responded to the deployment of resources varied. And we would see that at the end of all the typologies. In terms of typology 2, we identified high levels of coercive and normative pressures coming from professional influence of large firms and the deployment of advanced technology. And these were characterized more strongly in Germany and in Japan. For these two countries, as an example, in Germany, the professional influence of large firms was identified based on the fact that in most industry reports, the narrative was that it was the industries that were taking specific actions on their own in order to achieve greater economies of scale, as well as greater market, being more competitive on the market. That is in Germany, for instance. So there are some large house building firms. We identified about 4 of them who had similar ways of operating, and as a result, that was creating a form of influence on the rest of the house building sector, according to the documents that we analyze for these countries. And in both countries, we also identified that they have developed their technological capabilities as a resource to manufacture energy efficient housing. In Japan, for instance, the automotive industry provided a key source of manufacturing technology learning that was deployed in the house building sector. So we've got Daiwa Housing, as well as Toyota and Suzuki Homes, who have employed very varied forms of technology for particularly assembly manufacturing for the production of components for house building. The reliance on high technology is a very key advantage to these in these two countries. For instance, in Japan, one of the key requirements was to design houses. One of the key requirements is to design houses that are earthquake prone, for instance. And so most of the manufacturing technology is focused on the achievement of high interlocking components that would still act, that would have a high resistance to vibrations that emerge as a result of earthquakes, as an example. In typology 3, the US was represented owing to the availability of more or we would say higher degrees of fund or more varied sources of financial support for the industries that are, for the companies that are involved in the delivery of housing using offsite manufacturing. So we identified high level of normative and mimetic pressures from industry actors, and the employment of capital resources in response to these pressures. There are large manufacturing firms involved in the delivery of off-site manufactured built housing, and they often have a vertically integrated structure. This means that they control the design from they control the entire process from design to the delivery of housing to the consumer. And as a result of operating this vertically integrated structure, having a strong finance base to facilitate each and every stage of the delivery process is very important. Is very important for these firms. And given that that model has been identified as being successful, other large house building firms have also employed a similar approach in the delivery of off-site manufacturing built housing. And as a result, the companies that are trying to also emulate this pattern find themselves following suit to operate a vertical integrated firm and also draw on funding or financing from various investors and interested parties for delivery of such housing. In terms of typology 4, we identify high levels of coercive and normative pressures and the use of natural resources and skilled labor. It's interesting to note that these were strongly represented in countries like Canada and Sweden. The construction industry in both countries respond to the harsh climate in these countries and have developed their place as leaders in the adoption of off-site manufacturing for house building. As a result of the extremities of the weathers in these of the climate in these countries, avoiding the disruptions that climatic conditions would bring to the delivery of housing has been over time, has been identified as important for a very long time. And that has driven the development of capabilities for producing housing within factory environments. So this is one source of environmental pressure bearing on the house building industry. Compounding that is the fact that policies and regulations require compliance with environmental sustainability goals, and that places a form of coercive pressure on house builders. Responding to that is capitalizing on naturally available resources like timber, and also emphasis on professional development of skilled labor in the use of timber for the production of housing. So from our study, we offer some contributions to both existing literature and policy decisions, as well as practice. The key overarching contribution from our findings is that there is no one way to achieve widespread adoption and use of off-site manufacturing in any given context. And similarly, you cannot simply copy what is being done in one country and impose it in another. We know all too well how that does not lead to the desired outcomes. Clearly, the widespread adoption of off-site manufacturing is highly context-specific, and it takes into consideration institutional pressures within an established institutional setting, in this case, with emphasis on the house building sector, as well as taking advantage of available resources in order to effectively deploy them to achieve the desired outcomes. Relating this point to the example of Hong Kong, I know that the CITF, that's a construction industry, the Construction Innovation and Technology Fund, the CITF, has been around to facilitate provision of funding for wide-ranging, different kinds of firms operating in the industry to help them to assist them in deploying novel technologies that are going to facilitate the delivery of building projects in a way that is more innovative. And so with the government's investment in this direction, it is clear that there is heavy emphasis on finance as a source of resource to drive the uptake of modular integrated construction, for instance. We also present the fact that interactions between different context-specific and institutional pressures result in different typologies. But then having a high level of any kind of pressure does not guarantee greater use of offsite manufacturing in any country, as this goal is linked specifically to a good mix of both pressures and the response from the industry. So before any country can embark on an industry transformation agenda that seeks to drive greater use of offsite manufacturing, clearly it is important to undertake an evaluation of resources that are characteristic of that specific context, and also have a good understanding of the house building sector in order to deploy various mechanisms to achieve, whether it's by incentives or mandates. These tend to be the two common policy approaches: incentives or mandates, and also narratives. That's the third prong of approaches to drive offsite manufacturing, greater use of offsite manufacturing. We put forward the argument that no country is the same, which is very clear and understood. But then, prior to embarking on any agenda to drive offsite manufacturing, it is important to conduct these two levels of analysis to have a clear understanding of the mechanisms that will best yield the outcomes desired. In countries where compliance is more common, it's going to be fairly easy for governments to impose requirements or mandates for the use of a specific approach for offsite manufacturing. In the UK, for instance, in the UK at the moment, the government is trying to has implemented a policy mandate requiring the use of what's termed modern methods of construction for the delivery of affordable housing projects. There is a requirement that all delivery partners, as part of an £8 billion scheme, must deliver 50% of all, a quarter of all the houses that are going to be delivered under this scheme. 130,000 houses is the target of this affordable housing program. And as part of government's procurement requirements, there is a demand for all their delivery partners to use a specified form of modern methods of construction. If you check the UK's MMC categorization framework, you would see what I'm talking about. To use categories 1 and 2 for the delivery of these houses. So we can clearly see that this mandate is tied to a procurement goal meant to drive greater use of offsite manufacturing. Similar approaches can be adopted elsewhere, but then it is important to situate it within the existing structure of the house building industry. If the government has a strong control over the delivery of housing in a country, that is going to be fairly easy to achieve, and this demand will ripple through the industry and potentially cause the desired changes. But if that is not the case, then in a place like the USA, for instance, the government is better placed to allow the market forces to play out and allow those who are going to lead the curve in terms of the adoption of innovative approaches to do so, and allow others to catch up or try and emulate what they are doing. Another key contribution is that another key pointer from our findings is that even where typologies share similar pressures, for instance, in typologies 2 and 4, it is evident that the resources utilized in response to these pressures vary for reasons including the sources and the motives of the pressures and different environmental factors, as well as resource pools. In Sweden and Canada, for instance, there is reliance on skilled labor and natural resources in responses to pressures to build using offsite manufacturing. However, in Germany and Japan, it is evident that they responded to the coercive and normative pressures differently through the deployment of advanced manufacturing technologies. This clearly demonstrates that the pressures could be similar, but the resources deployed would vary from country to country. So what from all these, from our study, the question of so what stands out? Clearly, the different sources of pressures and resources interplay in varied forms in different countries. And so there is no one way of copying what country A is doing into country B in order to achieve the same results, because the existing house building, the existing structures of house building industries in these different countries vary. And so that is, to begin with, not very plausible. It is therefore important to undertake this analysis of a clear analysis of how the industry is working, who the key actors are in an institutional setting, what the existing resources are that can be capitalized upon, and how all this mix can be manipulated or strategically deployed to achieve the desired outcomes. This is really important because more and more we are continuing to see government-led initiatives that are meant to drive the construction industry to change or to be more innovative or to embrace innovation better. Following on from our findings, there are some pointers for future research. Clearly, the use of institutional theory reveals cross-country insights that informs our understanding of how different countries deemed leaders in achieving greater use of offsite manufacturing have done so. The question that remains for the future is looking at the nature of the shifts. Are they incremental, disruptive, or both? As we know, innovation is not episodic, it's more processual. And so trying to understand the process based on which these achievements were made is also going to refine our understanding of how these different countries are achieving greater use of offsite manufacturing, and also trying to take a path dependency approach to conduct a historical analysis of the countries that have achieved greater use of offsite manufacturing, questioning how the past has informed their trajectory of developments and how that might potentially inform our understanding of the future of their developments. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to acknowledge our research funders, the research supporting what I've presented. The paper that I have discussed forms part of the Center for Digital Build Britain's work at the University of Cambridge. And this sits within the research program of the Construction Innovation Hub, which is driving the industry transformation agenda with funding from the UKRI. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to discussing your questions. Over to you, Michael.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kwadwo, for your excellent presentation. So now we're gonna move on to the Q&A session. If you're ready to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, I guess I would just ask a clarification question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good presentation, Kwadwo. I wanted to find out, can this be implemented in Ghana, like on individual basis? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
You mean, I suppose you are referring to the innovation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Like was it you mentioned the timber, is it galvanized timber you mentioned or something like that? Yeah, I mean something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
All right. You're welcome. I think, well, the deployment of innovations are possible in different countries, depending on what the country seeks to achieve. And in Ghana, I know that there is a housing deficit, which is over 2 million at the moment.
Exactly.
And so the need for such innovative forms of construction to facilitate faster and more efficient ways of delivering housing is important.
Mm-hmm.
The government has made some efforts to try and deploy some innovations for house building. And if you look at the current highly contested or problematic housing project of the Saglemi housing project, they tried to deploy two innovations. It's a monolithic formwork technology, which allows you to build the frame or the structure of a 3-story building in 10 days, and the use of what's called insulated concrete forms. So these are all these are innovations that try to facilitate faster construction as opposed to the traditional brick and mortar, which take ages to complete. However, prior to deploying an approach like offsite manufacturing effectively, there is the need for skilled workforce as well as a supplier network that is already in place to facilitate the effective delivery. So there's the need for having a clear pipeline of government demand which will then facilitate investment into establishing factories and developing the relevant capabilities. And third, the need for developing the technological capabilities amongst professionals to design for manufacture and assembly, as opposed to designing for in situ construction. So it is possible. However, there is a lot of prep work that needs to go into it. And with a clear industry transformation map in mind, that can be achieved. Thank you for the question, Anita.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anyone with questions, I'm happy to answer them. Whether it's
hello, Oti.
Yes,
welcome
hi.
back, Oti. This is Kelvin.
Thank you, Kelvin. Great to hear from you.
I tried to ask Ronald to come, but I don't know where he has gone.
I don't think.
But anyway, so let me ask you quick questions. May not be relevant, but I think you mentioned that a very interesting phenomenon that Japan has a low adoption rate, about 20%, while Sweden has a relatively high adoption rate of 80%. And then you mentioned quite a number of pressures and resources factors that may contribute to the differences. So I'm just wondering. So if I mean, I'm taking a economic perspective. So I typically would like to see, okay, which one is the cause, or which one is the major factor that could explain the differences across countries. I know that may not be the right question to ask from an institutional point of view, but if I am approaching from an economic perspective, I'm wondering if your research will have any kind of insight or hints on how that kind of questions may be answered.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. So in Japan, well, Japan is deemed to be one of the countries with high percentage of housing delivered using offsite manufacturing. It has remained between 12 to 16% over the course of the past 2 decades. And in Sweden, it's projected to reach about 85%. Given, and I think, well, from the data we analyze, it might be plausible to say that the differences are as a result of the long trajectory of developing capabilities in response to harsh weather conditions in Sweden, for instance. So because of the extremities, the weather extremities, it has been the norm to rather build using timber, and 2, within factory settings. Whereas in Japan, it is only until the Industrial Revolution that the automotive technologies have informed the factory production of housing that are less related to the use of timber. So comparatively, Sweden has had a longer period of developing capabilities to achieve higher production of housing for using offsite manufacturing, and also the differences in terms of preference for housing. Whereas in Japan, according to the reports we engaged with, there is still some preference for traditional timber-based styles of housing that are more low-rise. The high-rise buildings, which are more recent, are the ones that are mostly manufactured as volumetric units that are that are then stacked on top of each other as multi-story housing units. So that these 2 reasons, that's the trajectory, the environmental conditions, as well as how recent the availability of modern technologies became to facilitate the delivery of housing using offsite manufacturing. These are the 2 factors that we can identify as having informed these differences between the 2 countries, although both of them have made relevant progress in shifting from traditional to offsite manufacturing use. So I would imagine that from an economic perspective, it would be about trying to understand the resource availability that could facilitate greater or more rapid production of housing. And then again, the type of housing would come into play here based on market preferences would come into play here.
Thank you. Yeah, very good answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. And thank you for having me back.
Hi, Otis, Frank here.
Hi, Frank.
Yeah, I think the availability of the forest can answer Kelvin's question. In Sweden, there's a lot of forest, so the precast timber can be a very good technology. And my question is, do you observe any considerable difference or significant difference in the factors, between the three types of prefabrication? One is the timber, one is the steel, and the third is precast concrete.
Thanks, Frank. So in terms of the materials used, materials as resources. What we identified is that clearly in each of these countries try to capitalize on what they have most. So in China, for instance, the use of steel framed components were greater owing to the greater production of steel in China, for instance, as opposed to, and then in a country like Singapore, most of the reinforced concrete, in Singapore, for instance, they tend to rely on reinforced concrete elements for their prefabrication, as you put it.
As also in Hong Kong.
Yes, and also in Hong Kong. But if you take a look at a country like Canada and Sweden, as you rightly mentioned, availability of timber facilitates the greater use of timber frames or timber framed elements for the production of housing. So clearly there are distinctions based on the availabilities of materials. And this goes to even further reinforce the fact that how resources will be deployed to respond to particular pressures to achieve greater use of offsite manufacturing indeed vary from place to place. And one of the key concerns now emerging in the literature is how does a country then balance between importing significant volumes of material from a different country whilst trying to achieve lower carbon emissions from using offsite manufacturing approaches. It's one of the questions that need to be solved, or that need to be understood, and remains to be explored. So thank you, Frank, for the question. There are differences in terms of the extent to which different resources are utilized, and these can be exemplified from the examples. These can be understood from the examples I've given across Singapore, what you mentioned about Hong Kong, and what I've highlighted with regards to Sweden and Canada, for instance.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Hi, Oti. Nice to meet you again.
Hi, Isabel. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Just as a follow-up question of what Kelvin has mentioned, do you think land resources could be one of the key factors which affect the pressures facing or the resources needed by different countries? For instance, for countries with sufficient land resources like Switzerland, which are, they have the low urban density area there. So they actually face less challenges for high-rise module assembling, for finding the offsite manufacturing factories nearby. These are the problems that the developers in Hong Kong are facing. And also they don't have the problem of, they face less problem of optimizing the transportation routes for the modules, for the large scale modules, etc. So it would thus be comparatively easier for their market to adopt, and also thereby to push the adoption, just like what you've mentioned, the mimetic pressure, and vice versa for other high density countries like Japan, and also probably cities as Hong Kong. So what do you think?
Thank you, Isabel. From your question, countries with land resource challenges, land resource challenges clearly inform the nature of offsite manufacturing approaches adopted. That is one key thing. I would use Singapore as an example. Singapore is a city state, and similar to Hong Kong, they've got land limitation issues, and so one of the key requirements from the government, they've as part of their mandates requiring for the use of offsite manufacturing approaches, there is a requirement for houses that are built on government sold land for housing to build about 70% of the housing in a factory environment. So for specific types of housing that are required to be high-rise, they must use what's called the prefabricated, pre-finished volumetric construction approach, which is more reinforced concrete volumetric modules for the delivery of such buildings. So that in itself is a particular source, is one of the sources of pressures which the government uses the tool of mandates to further drive down the supply chain related to the delivery of housing. As opposed to, so in countries where you realize that there are land shortage or land supply issues, the requirement is to go volumetric and to go higher. And there's greater use of more reinforced concrete modules, as opposed to countries where land issues are less of a problem, where they are more in tune with the use of timber for more low-rise buildings, because there is no pressure to go vertical, and there's more flexibility to go horizontally. So the issue of land in itself is a great factor that drives, one, the kind of offsite manufacturing approach to be used, and two, the materials to be used, the kind of materials that go into it, and three, the nature of the housing that will be put up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.
Hi, OT. First of all, thanks for your presentation. I have a question, is that, also follow Isabel, in institutional theory, we regard every institutional context is specific and unique. So for example, there have different cultures, land resources, or etc. So how do you conduct the comparison among countries or among typologies you mentioned in your funding? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, so to begin with, the goal of the study was to try and agglomerate these different factors that are already identified in the literature discretely, and move beyond the discrete country related factors or country related explanations or descriptions, in order to put forward an understanding that is more overarching through the use of institutional theory. So each country was considered individually based along similar factors. So whether it was financial resources, human labor, or any other forms of resources, these factors were examined through the 95 documents retrieved across each of the countries. So for each country, we take a look at what the resources are according to the documents we are reviewing that are mostly deployed. What's the range of resources that are deployed in response to the questions we would have answered in trying to identify the various kinds of pressures. So we did take into consideration the fact that these are different context-related factors, but then our goal was not to compare how each of these factors played out, rather to understand the extent to which each of these factors were deployed in response to a specified pressure, or how each of the factors were acting as a source of pressure as an underpinning source of the pressure. So the goal was not, in summary, the goal was not to compare each of these countries, but to understand how each of the various factors were playing out in the various countries, in order to identify, in order to try and categorize how the the achievement of greater use of offsite manufacturing was playing out across the various countries. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Oti.
Oh, hi,
Glad
Eagle.
to see you again. Hi.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious about the finding part. As you can see, there are different typologies of the pressures and the resources identified. I wonder if have you find any correlation between the pressure types and the levels and the resources that are identified? I mean, if any correlative pressure is more related to like capital or some other types of resources or something like.
I think that is based on the qualitative nature of the study. The establishing correlations was going to be a bit of a stretch from the study that we conducted, but well, I believe that is scope for future study, which you've clearly outlined here.
Yeah.
So yeah, the focus of this work was to, I mean, it was a strongly qualitative driven study. And so establishing correlations was going to be a mismatch for the kind of research design and method deployed. So hopefully in the future, that would be one of the questions that can be answered.
Okay, great. Looking forward to your future research. Maybe we can discuss later about that.
Yes, we certainly can. Thank you.
Yeah.
Beyond this presentation as well, I'm happy to answer questions related to the UK context with regards to offsite manufacturing developments. So do feel free to ask any question in that regard.
I heard that you have found your position at some university.
Sorry?
Have you already found a position in
position?
Yeah, and lecture. I think I have heard about it, but I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm moving positions, but still within the University of Cambridge. So
Okay.
yes.
Great.
I'll be seeing. Thank you.
Okay. Which university will you go?
No, still within Cambridge. Still within
Cambridge.
Yes.
Still as a research associate or assistant professor or lecturer?
No, it's a senior research position. So I'll be moving to. Yes, it's a senior research position at the Department of Engineering.
Oh, engineering. So it's in the IB's Brelakis under Brelakis project.
No, not under Brelakis. But okay. I'll be seeing Vivian okay. soon.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, OT. All right. Any other questions from the audience?
If there are any context-related questions on people's minds with regards to the UK, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anyone conducting research in relation to offsite manufacturing or MIC? Oh, hello. Yes. Hi.
Oh, hello, Doc. This is Frank.
Hi, Frank.
Thank you very much. I think your presentation was very nice, especially the typology analysis across different countries was very impressive. Okay, my question is about some African countries are doing well with this offsite construction, like South Africa and Rwanda. So is there a reason why you didn't include those countries?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frank. The selection of the countries was on the basis, was corroborated across industry literature, industry reports that's from the Boston Consulting Group, the World Economic Forum, as well as not McKinsey, but there is another, Savills is a house building company in the UK that tracks the use of offsite manufacturing in different countries. And so the representation, sadly, did not include these countries. But then the question again is, if you say they are doing well, how do we quantify they are doing well in terms of figures or in terms of representation? They could be doing well in their own right. However, the question remains that on the international scene, how would they fare compared to other countries? And it's good you make this point, because it draws my attention to one of the questions that we kept asking: why would we not include the UK? Because you read other literature, and then the question is, oh, the UK is also doing well. Yes, the UK is making strides. However, the goal of this study was to try and identify external learning that could inform the practice in the UK, as well as other similar economies that are trying to deploy offsite manufacturing approaches on a wide scale.
Okay.
So I believe that not including, it's more of trying to learn from the best in the class, as opposed to trying to learn from the top 100 in the class.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So potentially there is scope to understand if there are any possible differences with regards to what's happening in developing economies. Yes. So that could be a potential line of future inquiry.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Doc.
Thanks, Frank. Is there anyone who is, Michael, are you aware of anyone who is conducting research into offsite manufacturing, or I guess I would say manufacturing-led approaches to construction in the department? Perhaps Frank's group?
Yeah, I think that's our lab.
I see.
Yes.
I see.
We have a project about the logistics
MIC?
and the construction management in MIC. Yeah.
Okay.
Collaborating with the Hong Kong HKU East office about the Guangzhou student residential project, but developing, but it's a more like a technical one. It's about like how to integrate BIM, IoT, and blockchain to to foster the construction logistics and supply chain management.
Okay. Okay.
In addition to that,
hello.
Sorry. Michael, the ball
No
is in your
worries.
court.
Yeah, I think Frank, please go ahead, Frank.
I wish to supplement another project. It's just started, and we are looking at the quality assurance in the manufacturing in a factory. The method will be integrating multiple LiDAR sensors, so then we can have a 360 high precision data. But still, the currently the prototype is not completed. So yeah, perhaps you will read some reports or papers from my group in a year or so. And yeah,
Okay.
we are trying to use the high definition LiDAR and integrating multiple LiDAR to try to detect the defects. And
I see. Yeah,
not all of the defects, but the ultimate
some.
part of the detection of some of the defects. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That is interesting. You mentioned LiDAR because it's there's a currently, you might have heard of this project or might not. It's a Ministry of Justice project. It's a prisons project. It's called HMP5 Wells. It's a £253 million project, which we got the chance to study at its initial stages. Part of what they were doing, well, they deployed a raft of, is won several awards. Part of what they were doing was to deploy both BIM and digital, BIM and manufacturing-led approaches for the delivery of that project. And it was quite, I think it has just recently been completed. So they also deployed LiDAR to assess the quality of the project. So you might want to.
Did they deploy LiDAR on the construction site or in the factory?
In the factories, but it was linked. It was all linked such that the main contractor had the ability to view what was happening in the factories across their various suppliers for the project. I'm trying to find the chat function to stick in.
Great. I know some of the LiDAR sensors have been applied, but in the project, thank you. In the project, I'm looking at a new device. We're using the cheap LiDAR. For every LiDAR is less than 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, around 1,000 Britain pound, and by integrating 4 sets of such LiDAR device, and we add a workstation, notepad, right, laptop, and then we can integrate, and then we can have a much cheaper device than the currently available LiDAR sensors in the market. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. I think Anita was was saying something earlier. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, great.
Anita, if you could go ahead with what you were saying initially.
Oh, I wanted to just ask that, like, with all this, do you take into consideration, like, this conservation thing? We're trying to conserve trees and all that, but here we are maybe thinking of timber housing and the rest of them. I mean, I was just thinking on that line.
Yes, I understand your. I suppose you are talking more around environmental sustainability concerns and
yes, environmental sustainability, greenhouse effect, and the rest of them.
Yes, the interesting thing is that the timber is regenerative, so you can, regardless of the amount of timber that you cut, these can be, well, with a properly implemented plan, timber can always be replaced. And this is what the countries that rely a lot on timber tend to do. So as opposed to, I reckon your reflection is coming from experiences with regards to a developing country like Ghana, where we do not have.
And then the public health angle, yeah. Okay.
Yes, so it all requires a concerted effort. So no industry innovation plan is standalone. Often is the triple helix of education or industry or educational institutions and research, industry and government. So these three come together to guide or shape industry transformation or innovation attempts that ought to be well coordinated so that you wouldn't have a lopsided agenda that would then lead to some unintended consequences.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we still have some time for one last question. I just saw Tech raise her hand. Tech, if you're still on the line, feel free to unmute yourself. Are you there? Oh, I think, okay.
Yeah, I also saw TAC raise the
Yeah.
hand.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Thanks again, Oti, for your excellent presentation and for your insights. I think we're gonna end here so you can grab a water before your next meeting,
Okay.
one-on-one meetings. So yeah, so thanks everyone for attending. I look forward to seeing you in the next meeting. All right, so
Yes.
take care, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you, Odi.
Thank you,
Yeah, thanks
Michael.
for the insight. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So
Oh,
Michael, do
thank
I
you,
stay
Doc.
on or what do I do?
Vian, yeah, so please stick around for a bit longer. So Vian is gonna take you into the breakout room.
Yeah, there is
Okay.
one registration. So I will add you two into a breakout room. Please wait.
Okay,
Yep.
sure. All right. So when do I come back in? About how many minutes?
I think we can start the next meeting if you are ready to do so and the participants are ready to do so.
Yes, yes. I'm
is
happy to do
Dan
that.
still here? Is Miss Lee Dan still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so are you ready for the next meeting? So I will admit you and the speaker into a bigger room.
I'm fine. How about OT? Do you need some break to drink
No, I'm
water
fine.
or something?
No, it's all right. It's all right. Let's go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Please wait.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, only me here or several participants? Okay.
No, we just have to wait for them to. Or Vian, would you put us in a breakout room?
Yeah, sure. Please wait.
Okay, thank you.
Can you see the invitation?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so